the final full session here at the Symposium. I just wanted to tell you that so far we've had well over 1,000 digital views for all of our content. So that's people actually tuning in and watching the live stream pre-record, a number that we expect to grow. So we are now officially in the minority, those of us who are here, which we're kind of quite proud of. This session is just to let you know how we arrived at these sessions. So the topics that we're discussing. We put out a call back end of last year saying, what do people want to talk about? And we had over 120 responses, different topic ideas. So we narrowed those down to kind of 5 or 6 per session, and then we did a Twitter voting poll. And this is the topic that won the future session. Does new technology enable or create more barriers? Is technology reducing the uniqueness of disabled artists or enhancing it? What exists already? Who has access to it? And how can more disabled artists get what they want and need? What will the arts and access look like in the future? And your chair for this session, I'm delighted to say, is Claire Reddington. Claire joined Watershed back in 2004, establishing its creative technology programs, including the amazing Pervasive Media Studio and the Playable City program. She became creative director in 2014, and we're so incredibly proud that she is now the CEO of Watershed as of a couple of weeks back. Over to Claire.
Hi, I'm Claire. I'm an average height white woman. I'm wearing what Rachel Caldecott would refer to as an art smock. I have sort of mesh sequin leggings and a blunt fringe. And we're going to talk today a little bit about technology in the present and technology in the future and how those two things might interact. And to start off with, I guess I feel funny about technology. I love the conversations that technology enables and the places it allows me to go. I like the shape and the feel of the old internet, which erased structure and did away with hierarchy. But like you, I'm guessing my inbox is full, my social media stream is full of Nazis, and I'm overwhelmed.
You want to stop following them.
The echo chamber, James, the echo chamber. The culture sector feels a bit weird about technology too. The culture sector queues at the door of the Pervasive Media Studio, asking us to digital stuff for them. For 10 years, we have not digital stuff for anyone, but people still ask. The culture sector wants innovation, but they want it to look exactly like the thing they have already, and that's usually a brochure, which is a website. Funders and policymakers are a little bit funny about technology. They ask us to write separate policies for our funding applications, and I won't co-opt the great friend of mine who referred to that as absurd as having an electricity policy. They want us to write digital policies, but they don't themselves understand the difference between a stream and a download. The funders are funny about technology because they caught the large technology providers without asking questions, and they don't understand the leadership role of artists and the cards that they have in their hands, to play. The world is pretty funny about technology. Right now, we know we can't trust it. We know that it's riddled with unconscious bias. Technology is made by the same old white men. Tech Nation, which is the UK's kind of demographic understanding of the technology workforce, doesn't even collect data on disability. We don't even know how bad the problem is of representation with the people who make our technology. So really, there's nothing funny about technology, apart from cat gifs and Slack and Beat Saber, and activism, and all the things that technology enables and asks questions of. Technology gives us a way to make and share work, and especially here, I should say the people in our community that are asking the most delicious and most dangerous questions are the deaf and disabled artists we're collaborating with. I'm looking at Aidan, at Jane, at Johnny, at Juliet and Raquel, asking interesting and difficult questions of the technology that we make and share things with. So today, I hope we're going to ask and share some more of those difficult questions. We're going to unpack technology from all angles, look at its competing tensions, and have a think about what it means for the future of the culture sector. I've got a fucking great panel. They are incredibly knowledgeable in this area, and so I'm really excited to share them with you. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and to spend 10 minutes kind of sharing some thoughts with you, and then we'll have a discussion. So to start with, Kamal Sinclair, Director of the Sundance Institute's New Frontiers Lab, who is here for one day from America. You're up.
First time in London. Am I up? I'm up, okay. All right, so I'm just gonna do this so I can do my cheat sheet on my slides. Claire Reddington, amazing. So I have been working with artists at the intersection of art, technology, and science for the last 7 years at the Sundance Institute, and we've supported 1,500 artists that are doing this brave kind of work. We're looking for artists that are not just following the trends of technology and the kind of novelty of it and the gimmicks or the whiz-bang of it all. Oh, hey, my name is Kamal Sinclair. Let me tell you what I look like. I forgot that stuff. I am 5'10", which I think is like 1.78 meters. I've got really curly hair that goes a little bit past my shoulders. I am a woman of interracial background. My father is African American. My mother is Irish Scottish American. And so I have kind of this like high yellow skin is what they call it, where I came from. And I am wearing gray pants and a black sweater and a black top and a smile, because I'm happy to be here. I'm a little delirious with jet lag, but I am very happy to be here.
Can I just say, I think your microphone's doing something strange.
No.
It's inside, and that's going to be really
annoying,
distracting for people. Unless someone who knows what they're maybe let's leave it like that. Is that better?
Can you guys hear me? Hello? Testing? Okay. All right, I think it was my hair. I'll just keep it on this side. And so what I was saying is that my role at Sundance has been to basically create community for artists, technologists, people from the sciences to come together and to find, not just to invent new ways of telling story, but to find the meaning and the reason to do that, to find something resonant, something that makes meaning in the world. So I've had the privilege of working with an incredible, brave group of artists over those 7 years. But in that time, I also got to have a front row seat to explosions in kind of the tech trends of the time, particularly virtual reality, where we showcased the first prototype of the Oculus Rift back in 2012. We've seen all these things kind of augmented reality, artificial intelligence, even biomedia, be kind of the arenas that artists are asking really hard questions and interrogating. And I've definitely seen up close where those power structures that have, that from traditional media, traditional mass media, have started to replicate themselves in these new emerging mediums. And that was a concern of mine, especially being somebody from a number of identity backgrounds that would be categorized as marginalized in the tech and the media world. I started to ask hard questions about how do we try to stop those propensities in their tracks at the beginning of something, so that we don't have to. I remember I was on a conversation with a funder at this time when I was like expressing my frustration with seeing some of the power dynamics replicate themselves. And they said, well, we see that pipeline issues take about 15 years to correct. And I said, how is that possible with a medium that's 2 years old? And I said, how is it possible when people from very intersectional backgrounds were actually at the dawn of this, but they're not the ones that are getting funded to actually continue to innovate this? I said that old thinking about how do we create inclusion does not work in this, and it probably never worked before either, otherwise we would have achieved it. So trying to question those things. So that funder gave me money and said, hey, go out there and ask a lot of people these questions and help bring back some ideas about how we can intervene at the dawn of some of these new mediums that artists and storytellers are creating work in. So that resulted in a project called Making a New Reality that the Ford Foundation commissioned. And I asked over 100 people in the field from all different kinds of backgrounds 3 questions. I said, what is emerging media, so I can get a scope around it? What are your concerns when it comes to equality, inclusion, equity, justice? And for every concern you give me, please give me a recommendation for how we can mitigate that concern now. And so that resulted in a 180-page paper and a series that I've been publishing on makinganewreality.org over the last year or so. So I'm going to just not talk a whole lot about it, but I want to give you a little bit of the overview so we can, as we dive into this conversation with the panel, you get understanding. The way that our curatorial lens at Sundance is that we're following the artists. We're not prescribing anything to the artists about technology and what they should be doing. We follow the artists into their exploration of how they want to creatively express in these new technologies. We understand that story doesn't exist unless it's been heard or communicated in some way. So we are looking at artists that are hacking into and inventing the communication architecture and how humans connect and share those ideas and stories. We also understand that when we say making a new reality, we're not just being poetic, that we understand that storytellers have the power of manifestation. That storytellers define our cultural norms, storytellers define identity, storytellers disrupt identity, storytellers create culture. And so we've seen things like this, Minority Report is always an example that's brought up. Well, the guy that was the art director on that is actually one of our artists and advisors in our labs. And out of a process, he did a collective design process with people across all these different sectors of technology, engineering, science, arts, and they came up with this vision of the future back 25 years ago or so. And out of this collective design process, 100 patents came, 100 new technologies emerged from an imagination process. So that's how powerful we are as artists. The stories we tell, the imagination that we make actually does result in what comes into being. Obviously, this is talking about a technological manifestation of imagination. We understand that as storytellers, that that representations we put out into the world, the stories, the narratives about who we are and what is possible, actually changes the ways in which human beings can even perceive what they can bring into the future. So I won't get into a lot of the details, but the artists that we're working with are definitely doing very brave interrogation of things like artificial intelligence, holographic, making of, like in this case, this is a holographic image of a Holocaust survivor that they have put a natural language processing system with, so that you can walk up to the hologram and ask him questions and have a natural conversation with him. And this is where artists are trying to understand what is the future of documentary, what's the future of history making, what's the future of memoir, what's the future of your relationship with your ancestors. So, this is artificial intelligence, this hologram. This is a similar process where an artist is trying to understand how social AI how do we interrogate, how do we understand, smart machines that are developing identities as entities, right? So these are really tough areas. We're working with artists that are dealing with technologies that are either being embedded in our bodies or becoming part of your, and which I think this is an area that the disabled community has deep and intrinsic understanding, and as artists kind of start to shed the light in your interrogation of these technologies, your use of these technologies, assistive technologies. What does that mean when we are now embedding those technologies in our bodies in integrated ways? What does it mean when artists are now looking at bioengineering and the ways in which, these questions, they ask all new kinds of questions around what does it mean for the future of humanity, right? And we're also looking at artists that are at the intersection of medical science and technology. So this is a piece that we showcased in 2017 about a group of scientists that are working with paraplegics using exoskeletons, virtual reality, and brainwave input technology for therapy, and have actually seen pretty impressive results. What does this mean about how we're hacking into our bodies through these technologies, especially when it's connected with story? So I won't go into much more because I think my time is up. I'm almost up.
You've got 3 minutes.
I got 3 minutes. So I just wanted to show a little bit, like this is a piece where an artist went around New York City and gathered fingernails, hair, cigarette butts, and then was able to use the FBI DNA profiling system to 3D print the stranger's faces. So what does this mean when, what does this mean when now we can embed on our DNA actual media? We can actually embed films and email servers on DNA strands. What does this mean when Caltech last month was able to create the first neural network, which is, you know, kind of one of the foundations of machine learning, but now not on machines. They put the first neural network on DNA. The DNA is smart organic material that can read handwritten numbers. So these are questions, this is such fundamental things about what does it mean for the future of humanity. And a lot of our partners in the field out there from the World Economic Forum and from these other places that are thinking about it through the lens of economics and business and commerce, like Rachel said earlier, are missing some of the fundamental things about what's the future of culture. Just because we can do these things, what does that mean in terms of why are we doing these things? Who do we want to be in that future and how do we define it? And that is why it is essential for the people that are in this room to be part of that conversation in defining the future of society. So what were some of the concerns? There are a lot, and I'll go into this in more detail. Oh, I'm not getting it forward here. Oh, I've lost my forwarding capability. Oh, there we go. So I asked a lot of things. We'll go into this in detail in the breakout session, what the concerns and what the interventions were. But, hello. I'm not getting my...
Technology.
Yeah, you know, I'm talking about DNA neural networks.
Can't get a clicker to work.
This is a quote that is specifically talking about racial injustice, but I think it talks about, I think it applies to all of the areas that we see injustice perpetuating in terms of the power structures in media and film, technology. The progress of racial justice and the development of technologies are not linear. Every time you develop a new technology, you need to have a thought process about the history and systems of oppression that the technology is being created and released into. Think about ways to bend the technology to justice and not allow it to replicate, entrench, and worsen injustice. And I think that's kind of in the DNA of artists, asking these questions. And I'm looking forward to the conversation about how this community is contributing and continues to interrogate the future of culture. So thank you very much.
Is everyone okay with the microphones now? We've done a bit of hasty. Is it all, everyone can hear okay? Great. Okay, Johnny, you're up next.
You've got to do it there. Don't you do it.
Okay, fine, brilliantly. So I asked Johnny how he would like to be described because I'd written theatre maker down, and he was like, oh, I don't know about that. I'm a man of many hats. And so Johnny, a man of many hats who's wearing none of them currently, is going to share how he came to technology and a bit about his practice.
Thank you, Claire. First of all, thank you very much for asking me to be here, the massive privilege. Great conversation, great talking. I was stumped last night thinking about it, and actually I need to be thinking about my talk. So I'm really grateful for that lovely pink book where I'm able to write my note in there. I describe myself as a white British man, about 5'10". I am 45. I have a shaven head, a beard. There's grey head in my beard, which showed my age. So I'm about 44. I'm wearing a blue shirt and jeans. I think I'm quite smart today, because I think my mum is watching it on YouTube, so I'm making an effort. Hi, Mum. I have glasses on, and I wear two faulty hearing aids. So if you do hear some kind of beepy noise, don't worry, it's not the fire alarm, it's probably my hearing aid. I describe myself a deaf man who speaks very well. I was born deaf, I'm profoundly deaf. Deaf was not really a word when I grew up. I kind of feel like I was almost normalized in the way that I had to speak. So I've had that kind of intensive speech therapy. And it goes with a lot of deaf people, I suppose, back in the 70s, the 80s, where speech therapy was an option and not sign language. So I didn't really know sign language. In fact, I didn't even meet a deaf person until when I was about 35, about 10 years ago. So I kind of grew up in that kind of hearing world. I was a teacher for a long time. I taught art and photography and teaching in secondary level, but I decided to quit teaching to become an access consultant. And the reason why I did that, because the lack of response to deaf artists in the arts. I felt that there's a lack of representation for deaf artists, not just on the stage, but more about how we make work accessible for a deaf audience. I've worked with small companies all the way to larger art venues. I was very fortunate from Art Council Wales to support me in developing a toolkit for deaf audience. I continue to do this, but sometimes I question myself, is it working? Is it really working? Is that toolkit, it was a great toolkit, I worked on it for a long time, is it shelved or are people using it? Is my consultancy working? Is it going out there and coming out that ear? So I thought, and I apologize what I'm going to say, fuck it. I am going to become a performer. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to perform. I've never ever performed before. I've never acted before, I'm not trained, but what I did know that I think by becoming a performer, I was hoping that I would make a difference. I knew that becoming a teacher, I've had some experience working with people, so I thought, well, actually, I see the audience at my pupils. So, we'll go on to the next slide. So, you'll see on this slide is a poster, and the title of my show is called Loud But Not Always Clearer. And I came up with that title because people were shouting at me, and I would say pardon, they were shouting at me, and so I wanted to make a bold statement. I am half naked on a chair, and I have gaffer tape all around me. Please do not try this at home. Gaffer tape really hurts when you take it off. Reason why I wanted to have gaffer tape around me, I wanted the idea of feeling trapped. And that object on my body. So I've got like I don't know what it is. It's like an old hearing aid maybe, or something. So because I used to wear these big hearing aids, and it was just my statement of what it was like to be feeling quite trapped. Loud But Not Always Clearer, it really is an autobiographical journey of a deaf man trapped in a hearing world. It really is a struggle, and it talked about isolation in the hearing world. It's a story from my search for acceptance, and it's a story of late introduction into deaf culture. Before I play a video, I've got a video of my show. I make work that really is to an audience that, for those who don't really know me and they need to really feel or care or something about me to feel empathy. And I used quite a lot of technology in making the show. when I make work or when I develop work, I parallel everything with making work. So ACT, the script, the stage, the track design, and so for me, if I parallel everything together, it makes it more unique, adding more beautiful layers to the work. I wanted to give a personal show. I wanted to give a personal insight about Johnny, to experience isolation, frustration, vulnerability. I wanted the audience to fall in love with me regarding my deafness. I think developing this, I think ACT could enhance and support and not support. I think the aesthetic of ACT could add fantastic layers. In the film you're about to see, you will see me doing some rehearsing, performing. There was a conversation with two people looking away from the camera, talking. There are so the captions will be a bit distorted, and also at the very end there will be me talking into a megaphone. Can you play the video?
My name's Johnny. I was born deaf. Being raised in a hearing world, I had to learn deliberately. I'm performing in a one-man show that explores my struggle of being a deaf man living in a hearing world. For a hearing audience, it's an eye-opening experience. For a deaf audience, a familiar tale of isolation.
I was really fortunate to have support from Natural Theatre Wales, who spurred me on the idea of coming up with the show, and then future funding from Art Council Wales to really push me. The show, I didn't expect anything out of it, but it's been really positive in the way that hearing people have come up to me and said, I'm really sorry if I'm one of them. And deaf people come up to me and say, thank you very much for being brave. And you know what, I'm sharing my story. It's the same for many deaf people. The show went on tour across Wales, sold out tours across Wales, and it's looking now to go to a future tour next year. But I still felt that I needed to do more. And could we go to the next slide? I wanted to do more. I really wanted to, empathy was something that was really important to me, and something that I really wanted the audience to really understand what I was feeling like. So I'm very fortunate to get to be an artist of empathy with Pervasive Media Studio at Bristol in the watershed. And I said to them, what can I do to make this show better? They said, you don't need to do anything. It's just how it is. So what I thought was to come up with the idea, so I flip it. So the audience becomes deaf. So I come up with a concept, and I called it HHA, Hearing Aid. So the idea is that the audience will wear a hearing aid. It's a prototype, we hadn't been done yet, so it will be a 3D print. And the idea is that using technology to really give that kind of feeling of what it's like to wear a hearing aid and what it's like to hear those sounds. But bear in mind, I only hear 30% a conversation. I rely on eye contact, I rely on body language, I rely on lip reading. I also have a lot of amplification of sound. So I really wanted to get that to through the HHA. So how can we make that into a theatre space and really experience that? So what we have here, I don't know if you could play that GIF. What we have here, we have something called face tracking. So we see a woman moving around the space and she's really enjoying herself. So the idea is the face tracking detects what the eye moves. Now, so I want to do something similar. So the hearing aid, the HHA, would be something similar like in the glasses, which is on the bottom right-hand corner. It's a photo of the glasses, and in the top left-hand corner is the camera. And the camera will detect what is moving. So because I lip read, and because a lot of hearing people tend to move around space, so it becomes difficult, so I can't lip read. So the idea of having the face tracking were the ways that I could create using the HHA. And could we go on to the next slide, please?
Start winding it up,
we have something here at the top by a company. I think it's a company called YOLO, You Only Look One. And what we see here is lots of things moving around, and it detects what is moving around. And again, it's something that I wanted to do through the HHA, the camera. I hear lots of different things. So, for example, the kettle boiling, I will hear that. So really, really loud, so the conversation I'm having will become really, really quiet. I will hear the echo, it's much louder than my voice. So the HHA will kind of pick up those sounds, so we'll move things, it will go louder, it will go quieter, and it will also interact with other sounds. And then down the bottom, we have something called the Heart of the King, and it is a shape of a heart, and it's supposed to imitate the heartbeat of Charles I. So my idea was, because I lose one sense, and I rely entirely on feeling. I feel something, I feel music. So I thought, would it be great to have the idea of holding the object and be able to feel it regarding the way you are. But then I thought about accessibility, because accessibility is really important. So then using the object you hold, that you can have captions, or a caption within the object. So it doesn't necessarily have to be on the screen, so it's within the, inside the object. I know I'm running out of time. I'm really excited about this project. I'm really excited to be working with Pervasive Media Studio. I know nothing about technology, but because of the couple of weeks I've been Pervasive, it's given me a lot of afterthought about what I could do about making this work. Thank you very much.
And our final presentation will be from James Hilton, who started with the founder of AKQA, which was one of the most phenomenal agencies for creating immersive, amazing web experiences, real-world stuff. And now you're the Chief Creative Officer at Native.
I am.
Good. And you're going to share some thoughts with us.
I am. Hello. Say hello back. Thanks. I'm James, 6'2", 212 pounds, spent entirely too long in gyms. I'm largely sponsored by Nike, and I wear a hat. So that's the only differentiator between me and Johnny, otherwise we're exactly the same. 45, bald with a beard.
Welcome to the tech industry.
Yeah, there we go. So you know, like at the end of news bulletins, and you've listened to half an hour or so of like in-depth analysis and really intelligent thought, and then you have a squirrel on a skateboard at the end, or an idiot. I'm the squirrel on the skateboard. So I'm feeling like I don't have much to offer, but I'm going to tell you what I'm all about anyway. So I dropped out of college as the cliche goes, about 22 years ago and started a company called AKQA, which was at the time called a digital agency. Now, as we've already spoken about, the word digital is redundant and pointless. And I spend a lot of time telling clients that if they asked for a digital strategy, they were already asking the wrong question. So, you know, there's a similarity there. And I did that for 20 years and grew the company into about, well, there were 4 of us to start with, 4 idiots in a basement. And that grew to about 2,500 people in 14 offices around the world. We sold it like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago for something like 350 million quid. So that was nice. And then about 2 years ago, I thought there must be something else going on in the world other than AKQA. So I left. So you know that film Point Break where he jumps out of an aeroplane and he just says, I'm about to jump out of a perfectly good aeroplane? Well, that was me. So that was interesting to do. And I started a creative studio called Atelier Strange that took very old furniture and weaved technology inside it, so you couldn't see the technology, but it was there. So you know, things like sensors and contactless charging and things like that in pieces of furniture that were 17th century. And then I started a custom motorcycle company called Death Machines of London. And that's doing pretty well. And then Native asked me to come and be their chief creative officer. And Native are a product design company, or really rather a user experience company. So we design everything from Bang & Olufsen speakers to medical equipment. We just finished an autonomous vehicle for a large American car company, which I can't tell you about. And that's all great. So that's kind of like work history. And during that, one thing that happened during that work history is when you're in charge of kind of that many people, they give you what are called psych tests to find out that you're not totally crazy, and you can be trusted a bit. And during that time, they found that I scored low on empathy. Funny that. And I tend to offend a lot of people because I always told them the truth. And because I didn't have any empathy, I didn't care what they thought. So it all kind of worked out from my point of view. Anyway, it turned out that I was something called Asperger's. And I thought that was interesting for a point. And it made sense of some of the feedback that I've been given over the years. You know, cold, robot, machine, stuff like that. And then you know, it was known that I had Asperger's, and then I got more feedback. You know, you're not Asperger's, you're just a wanker, stuff like that, which you know, is all good feedback. And then an editor of a magazine, I was having lunch with her, and we were having this discussion, and she thought this was really interesting, and so I had to write an article about that. And ever since that day, I've kind of like keep being invited to things about neurodiversity, and I'm totally the wrong person to be inviting to these things because I'll say something that's really wrong or offensive. But anyway, I speak a lot about, so I've done like, I'm probably the least educated person in the room because I never actually finished college. But that didn't stop people like Ted and Oxford University asking me to go and do lectures there, and that was always embarrassing. And I would go there and do talks about what is creativity and what is creativity and technology, and what is creativity, how do you become more creative, and how can businesses become more creative. And as I'm sat here kind of like, you know, listening to all these introductions, it reminds me of those conversations. Because one of the topics of conversation that I go on about is what is diversity in business? Every business out there at the moment wants to have a diverse workforce. I don't think I think pretty much diversity is meaningless without equality, because you can have a whole bunch of different people. Thanks. I probably stole it from somewhere, but you can have a whole bunch of different mindsets. And when I talk about diversity, I'm not just talking about black, white, male, female. I'm talking about people from different socioeconomic groups, different neurologies, different orientations, different everything. Different is good. And it's about being different, not defective. Yeah? So when people start talking about disabled, that worries me, because I don't really like the word, right? And I know it's a word that is used to describe a certain group of people, but I see it as a label that has been put upon a group of people to separate them from a majority of non-disabled people. I see disablement as not being able to think, and not being able to structure sentences, and not being able to communicate in one way or another something effectively for the betterment of mankind. I think if you're not, the only metric that matters in this world is contribution. If you're not contributing in one way or another, then time to leave. Don't know where you'd go, but time to leave. And so how can businesses and technology create environments whereby difference is not seen as defective, whereby everyone's contribution is valid, and whereby everyone is absolutely equal? And there are entire new systems that need to put into place. There is profound change that needs to take place within our societies where difference is concerned. I'll need to refer to my notes, because I do tend to ramble on a little bit sometimes.
It's all right, I've got you.
Have you?
Yeah.
All right. So how the world deals with difference needs profound change. Creative people, and that's everyone, are never disabled. They just need to find ways in which to allow that creativity to flourish in the most appropriate way. So technology can bring wonder, for sure, but technology can also bring wonder why they bothered. And that's just as relevant for people with all their limbs and faculties intact as it is for people who don't have leg or don't have hearing or don't have eyes. That's not the factor that differentiates people. The factor is, how good can you be at communicating your idea, and what medium are you going to use to do that? So really, the difference is that it's to prove that the only barriers that anyone faces, this is how technology can come about, this is how technology can work, is to prove that the only real difference is the barriers that people face themselves internally. And how can we change that inside people so they don't see difference as a barrier? How can we take these restrictions that have been placed upon them by history, by society, and how can we make those so that they disappear? Because labels and societal ideals are just simply control constructs that we can change if we want. But this change has to come from everywhere. It doesn't just come from groups like you guys. This is great, but unless the kind of ruling majority is not doing this, isn't acting upon it, isn't making the appropriate changes within their businesses or organizations, then it's never going to happen. It's never going to change. Look at feminism. How long has that taken? It's going to be generational. You know, I talk to my daughters now and I ask them, you know, when do you think equality will happen? And they're actually pretty pessimistic about it. And I say to them, well, no, I don't think it will happen in my lifetime, but it may happen in your lifetime, and it will certainly happen in your kid's lifetime, but everyone just needs to keep pushing. And the same is true for everything. The same is true for access to buildings. It's like, you know, something like the disability law that meant that you had to be able to have access to buildings in wheelchairs only actually came into law in like 1986 or something. Like, and a wheelchair was invented in 1700. It's like, why didn't those two things come hand in hand? And then I was thinking, what happened before 1700? Anyway, that got me onto something else. Right.
You're probably like coming to the end. Like,
I am probably coming to the end, right?
Yeah.
So with that in mind, that's a really polite way of saying that. Shut the fuck up. Technology can bring about fabulous opportunity for everyone, but it'll only be truly achieved when we're all equal. And that can only happen when our children are taught that difference is meaningless, and when our schools and learning centres manifest true equality, and they stop categorising our futures based on somebody else's idea of what academic success looks like. When outdated and intolerant thinking is eradicated from our societal systems and our businesses. So, you know, that coder who never fills out his timesheets, he's not a twat, he just doesn't understand time management like other people do. When we're all measured on contribution and no other metric. If we're talking about creativity, that will be humankind's creative masterpiece, and every single one of us will be the artist. That's it.
Right? Like, what a squirrel. That's, thanks. So maybe let's start with contribution. Like, how do you see technology enabling your creative contribution to the world right now? What are you excited about? Any of you?
You go.
Oh man, I'm the arts admin on the panel. No, I was a practicing artist for a long time. What I can say from what I'm seeing in the field is, I think that some of the technologies that are coming into being in the emergent technology area, in terms of how it's enabling artists and storytellers, media makers, is that in some ways it's allowing a layer of reality to get uncovered that in like more broadcast, proscenium arch kind of oriented traditional linear storytelling, it doesn't necessarily kind of fit with other ways in which people see reality or experience reality. And so it's allowing an experience into a way of experiencing reality that other people, you know, especially us coming from a Western European kind of cultural lens, may have missed out on. And so I'm saying this in a couple of ways. Okay, let me give it some context. One of the first kind of landmark documentary VR pieces that happened, got an Emmy last year, called Collisions. This was a piece in collaboration with a Martu man in Australia named Yari Morgan, who had experienced an atomic explosion in his youth from a British test that was happening in the interior of Australia. And when he first saw a VR piece, he saw a commercial for a North Face, you know, thing. It was like a drone going over a mountain climber. And he said, finally there's a technology for you white people to understand what it's like to be Martu. Because he comes from the oldest community on the planet, 40,000 years old, 800 generations on that land. And when they collectively paint the land, they not only match satellite imagery, but they also match every single geological layer in the painting. They astral project in their meditation. Their whole relationship to the land is one that a traditional screen could never give us a way into. And so that is just an example of another relationship to reality and to land and to orientation that this particular technology allowed us that didn't come from that a way in. And I think similarly, one of the landmark pieces that happened in VR that actually proved, in my opinion, why VR, because that's a big question, because if you're just replicating television and film, why put the story in VR? And it was called Notes on Blindness. Has anybody seen this piece, Notes on Blindness? Okay. So this was a piece that was done in collaboration with a gentleman who had descended into blindness over many years. Descended, right? I put that in quotation marks. Me as a sighted person experiencing this piece, there was a film talking about, because he took these really rigorous audio diaries of his descent. He had things like, I tried to catalog in my head all the imageries and flowers, and so that I could have this visual library that I could call upon when I went completely blind. And then he said, and then 3 years into blindness, I couldn't remember my children or my wife's face. So he said, so he talks about some of those cognitive changes. But then in the VR piece, you're in complete blackness. And as a sighted person, I'm hearing these old 1980s kind of 8-track going with all this white noise, and just hearing his voice describe all this to me. And then all of a sudden he said, but then I started, and he started talking about echolocation. And the kind of the ascent of that capability. And then he starts to say, like right now, the pigeons by my feet. And then they give me as a sighted person just a little glimpse of the light kind of illustration of pigeons by my feet. And then I go, oh my God, I was hearing pigeons that whole time. Or the train that's 3 miles that way. And then you see a little tiny thing of a train in the distance. And I go, oh my God, I did hear a train. Basically, through this, I realized how I, as a sighted person, was completely blind, you know, to the auditory kind of reality around me, because I depended so much on just my eyes to communicate what reality was to me. And so for me, that's another example of how artists are using and hacking into these new capabilities to try to illuminate aspects of the human condition and the human experience that we don't get to share with each other, and that's all I'll say.
Which I think is very much what, Johnny, you're trying to do in your work, although we could also kind of delve into the black hole of empathy machines and cultural appropriation, and whether it's even okay to pretend that you've given someone an experience of your world with technology.
Yeah, I think just to follow up on what you've done, but first I'd like to mention from years and years of watching theatre performances having a caption. For me, I didn't feel anything. I don't feel anything. I watch a theatre performance and I'm watching something like I'm watching now. I don't have that feeling. I don't get it. And so I stopped going to those type of performances and I watch normal performances just to physically watch them. But with what I'm trying to do now is with the HHA, the hearing aid, is to really have a greater understanding of feeling and empathy, and how we could really immerse yourself into that kind of environment. And that's what I believe in, having layers of creativity and technology. What I've learned really add those layers.
To pick up where you see technology aiding contribution.
Yeah, so like 10 years ago, right, there were auditions for an orchestra, and I can't remember what orchestra it was, but they were auditioning for cellists, and you know, the kind of like the director of the orchestra was in the, you know, up in the seats. And the person coming for the audition would come onto the stage and, you know, start playing, right? And at the end, they found that about 80% of successful applicants were male. So then what they did is they put a huge barrier, like a cloth barrier, so an audio transparent but visually opaque barrier between the people doing the auditions and the people choosing. And the people walked out, they weren't wearing shoes, so you couldn't tell if it was high heels or trainers or anything like that. And then, hey presto, the end result was 60% were women who were successfully auditioned. And I think that is a good illustration of what technology can do. Technology levels the playing field. You can't have equality without a level playing field. And at the moment, it's not a level playing field at all. It's always dipping off to, you need local knowledge. You need to know that this particular billiard table sinks down in that corner, right? And if you don't know that, then, you know, you're never going to get a ball down there.
So what responsibility, though? So when we say technology, it means a lot of things. But we
Yeah.
are using technologies of surveillance and control within the culture sector.
Yeah, right.
We're using GPS, we're using Facebook, we're using technologies which have inherent kind of power structures within them.
Yeah.
How do we ask questions, or what work do we need to make to address those things?
I think it's going to take generations to sort this out, right? This is like, the internet started like 20 years ago properly, right? 20 years ago. We only had flushing toilets like 50 years ago, right? It's like, we are primitive, really, really primitive. And we walk around saying that we're a modern culture, or we're a modern civilization. We're not. We are at the gramophone stage of this technology, and we don't know how to use it. And what we're seeing is misuse. We're seeing state misuse of the technology, and we're seeing great advancements for the betterment of society on the other hand. And I think, like any natural system that has been born, you are going to get this battle going on between the two mindsets of how this system is going to be used. And I don't think that's going to be solved in 10, 15, 20 years. I think it will be solved in 100 years. And we will understand then that we can all work with everyone, and everyone can have access to the same abilities that everyone takes for granted, and everyone can take everything for granted at that point in time. So there's elements of it now. It's like, I get to work with, I've been recently working with this amazing After Effects designer. After Effects is like a 3D animation, cool shit program. They're in New Zealand. And I've never seen them, I've never met them. I only actually found out that they were a guy like a week ago. It turns out, he's wheelchair bound. But, it doesn't matter. It allows him, the technology allows him to be amazing wherever he wants to be in the world. Now, I know that's just a really small example, but I think it's a shining example for where it can go.
I think one of the things that I've found in the conversations I had with people across the technology and media sectors around this particular issue is that one of the ways that we can cut the time down to like kind of figuring out how to design for justice, design for well-being, and design for prosperity at the same time is having people in those groups that are innovating and deciding the value systems around these technologies from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of diversity of thought, a lot of diversity of experience, because it helps us to find our blind spots that we would, like, the classic example is Google's, the technology that allows you to, change the orientation from portrait to landscape on your phone as you're moving the phone around, and for 20% of the population, it wouldn't move, it wouldn't change the orientation, and they realized, oh, that's left-handed people. They just completely didn't have any and they didn't have any left-handed people in the small group that was working on that technology. It wasn't malicious. It was just completely out of their range of their what they were seeing and thinking about. They didn't even think or consider left-handed people. So what I have seen is when you do include more people in those processes, then they find those blind spots much more readily. And it helps us to kind of cut that trial and error part. We're going to hit trial and error, but there's certain people that when they're in the facial recognition technology sector and they start noticing, black folks are getting categorized as gorillas, and that Asian people aren't getting categorized at all, or not getting categorized as having their eyes open, they'll see that a little faster if they're Asian or black, potentially. I mean, that's what we're starting to see. So I do think that absolutely these technologies can be, neutral morally, but unless we really engineer the inclusion, we're going to experience things like, for example, with the Industrial Revolution, they're calling this the fourth.
Before we get to the
oh,
Industrial
yeah, okay.
I mean, I feel like I could hear Joe intake breath behind me. Luckily, we've got a short break, and then we've got the breakout groups for loads more of this thinking. Thank you for this. That was brilliant. I'm like, yeah, there's so much to talk about. Can you join me in thanking James and Jenny and Claire?
Well, we said it was going to be a challenging day, and hopefully we've delivered on that. Just to let you know where the breakout groups are happening. Weston, Kamal and Johnny will be up here. In Claire will be chairing the discussion. In Foyle, Clara Giraud from the Unlimited team will be chairing, and I'm going to be chairing the one in the JLR meeting room. So we've got a 15-minute break before those start. There's tea and coffee in those spaces. Can we all, after those groups, come back to the Western for our final closing remarks and thanks and stuff? So that will be at about 4:30. So we've got a bit of a break now, and then an opportunity to regroup all together at the end of the day.